Welcome to the Energy InSites podcast, your source for the latest insights in deep retrofits, renewable energy, and energy conservation. And now let's get to today's insights. My guests today, both from SAIT's Green Building Technology Access Center, spend their days trying to break things on purpose so that we can all sleep safer and more comfortable at night. Dean Jones and Ben Hildebrandt co-manage one of Canada's premier laboratories and teaching facilities when it comes to next generation building materials. If you've got a new building material that you want to prove out, these are the guys you're going to want to talk to. Dean and Ben, welcome to Energy InSites.
Kevin, thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us, Kevin. Cheers. Good intro.
Yeah, it is my pleasure and my honor. And I'll start by just giving a quick shout out to Dean. You and I go back a long ways. We have mutual friends in Calgary. And I was just thinking about it this morning, and we've known each other now probably close to 25 years. So, you know, not in touch every day. I'll give you that, but there's a lot of love there. And Ben, we haven't known each other quite as long, but I love the work that you guys are doing together. So why don't we start with a little bit of the backstory of the Green Building Technology Access Center, how you guys kind of co-developed this and how you brought it to where it is today.
Well, maybe I'll go ahead first. And maybe just a kind of it wasn't just Ben and I. We have a full team here that's been a work in progress for quite some time now. The Green Building Technologies within the Applied Research Department here at SAIT got started, back in 2008, roughly, 2009. So started with humble beginnings, acquiring an NSERC grant, multi-million-dollar grant to get this new Green Building Technologies office started. So we've been located in the northwest corner of SAIT campus since then. And like I said, humble beginnings. We were just a single membrane Quonset tent with an ATCO structure, an ATCO trailer for many years on the site here, carrying out green building applied research. And this site here, it's taken on quite an evolution, and we're now since 2017, 2018, into a nice new facility. Kevin's had the pleasure of visiting, open invitation to others. We got a lot of cool infrastructure. And so I'll leave it at that and let Ben carry on.
Yeah, and maybe I'll chime in as well. It's kind of like a phased advancement from those early beginnings in the Quonset tent and the ATCO trailer. We have the main office building research lab space. We're in 2017, 2018. Then I believe it was in 22 that Quonset structure got replaced with a insulated tension membrane structure. So we have a lot of work, like you mentioned, Kevin, in the intro, us breaking things and testing things out. A lot of that happens out in that tent shop area. And in the past, when it was minus 30 in the wintertime and we're testing out there, we're testing in minus 30. Now we've got that conditioned and insulated, so it's much better. And we're hoping that at the end of the conversation today, we can, for those viewing this in the future, we're hoping to squeeze in a brief tour out there as well, so you can check out some of the equipment we have in that portion of our lab. There's a lot of amazing work that we've done. And I would say too, we do far beyond just testing and breaking materials. The earliest days of the Green Building Technologies Research Group, correct me where I'm wrong, Dean, because you were directly there. I wasn't so much. But it really started in working with local builders in around that 2008 period. And how do you do a net zero home? Now in the industry today, we know how it's done, but we were involved early days in an initial two, especially with Avalon Master Builder, and then go on, and that was like 2009 to 2012 period, and then around 2016 or so, we were involved with a large national research project. I can't remember what federal organization, but also a partnership with Madme Homes, where we're involved in a set of 5 net zero homes being built up in Northeast Calgary, and how do you do that? But now the net zero has been really proven with a lot of work across the industry. Can't say that without shout out to the Canadian Home Builders Association, which they have the prevalent kind of certification for net zero homes in Canada. But right now we span the gambit in the research we do. We kind of have it in 3 main buckets on the building and material science end of things. And then we move into energy and building systems, and that gets into the HVAC, electrical systems in homes and buildings, controls. Right now, we're looking into demand side management, establishing a microgrid over the next couple of years on our site as well, so we can not only look at those microgrid demand side management aspects of things without impacting SAIT campus, but also so we can test some not fully certified components and equipment that are coming to market without creating risk for the larger campus.
Right.
Just risk for us in our day-to-day. And then the final bucket is really on the environment piece, which Dean has done a lot of work in the past that spans from indoor environmental quality, looking at the emissions side of things. In the past, we did a lot with rainwater capture, recovery, green roofs, living walls, and such like that. So we have a very multidisciplinary team. I think we're around 15 or 17 right now. And I would say Dean and I are part of the management team, but we're not the co-managers. Luckily or unfortunately, I don't know how we want to look at that, but but it's an amazing team we have. We're very multidisciplinary. Dean and I just represent a small portion of the expertise we have on our team, and we have many projects that span those different areas of research within a single project. So it's a lot of amazing work we do. We really focus on how can we get into the applied research, not necessarily developing the technologies, but how do those new technologies apply to buildings?
So I would piggyback off you, Ben. I've been here at the SAIT's Green Building Technologies Access Center for over 12 years now in 2 different stints. So I started in 2010, and it's interesting to see the evolution of what we'll kind of call the green building industry. When I started, my first project was focusing on gray water reuse and recycling. That was my first, contracted project. So I delved into the full nuts and bolts of within the Alberta context of what it takes to do, actually harvest gray water and potentially reuse it, all the code implications, safety implications. And then that evolved into more rainwater harvesting, which is a lower hanging fruit, a better water quality to handle. But also at the time, as Ben already kind of alluded to, working with builders, local builders like Avalon Master Builder, they were focused on developing net zero homes. And we had the pleasure of actually working with a number of their net zero homes, Discovery House number 3 in Red Deer, I believe, Discovery House number 4, which landed in the southeast of Calgary. That was done with a structural insulated panel system, but the house was broken into sections. So it was actually taken apart, moved down to the southeast and rebuilt. That house had a number of different solar PV and solar thermal integrated technologies that they were testing. And then I had luckily enough, got the pleasure of working on the Discovery 5 house, where we actually combined everything within one single family residence. We had a 14,000 liter cast in place concrete cistern, rainwater cistern. We actually took all that water inside, flushed the toilet, irrigated an indoor living wall, outdoor hose bibs, and actually got cold water laundry approved at that time, back in 2012.
In the demonstration house.
Well, it was actually it was an actual living house. The general manager at the time of Avalon, that was his actual personal house. So that was a great project to get to work with, where he was the actual
really talk about putting your money where your mouth is. That's totally great.
And so we tested 2 different types of solar installations on the roof. We had like Ben mentioned, environmental and architectural ecology features added to that house. So it was the evolution of green building, where I was going with that, is where we are now. Net zero, as Ben said, net zero is should be commonplace almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, where what it takes or what it could take to make a building net zero. The retrofit sector has really been the evolution in the last 4 or 5 years, I would say, where there's been a lot of funding put towards all the existing buildings. When we're talking about our 2050 national goals or climate goals, where we're trying to get to net zero as an economy, as a country. This is where retrofitting buildings really comes into play, and all the existing structures, whether it be residential or commercial. So this is where a lot of work we've done in the last, say, 4 years has been focusing on introductory curriculum, developing guidebooks on the residential scale, working with project partners like Alberta Eco Trust when they've received NRCan funding for a Deep Retrofit Accelerator Initiative, kind of bringing together an ecosystem of partners that we're all working with. So yeah, maybe Ben, did you want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on, kind of a nugget there to elaborate more on your Deep Retrofit training certificate?
Yeah, a lot of work we've done that really started back, I think it was 2022, when we started doing the work on the residential deep energy retrofits. We had some funding from SSRIA in Alberta, where we developed a very small training package as part of that, like a day of training essentially. And we also developed a guidebook, which has been very well received, kind of looking at introducing contractors to retrofits. One of the things we established during that was the need for more in-depth training. We have an industry of renovators and contractors, many of which have no formal training of any sort, but are still trying to do the right thing. And when we come into these deep energy retrofits, which have some very important considerations on the building science side that you can't get wrong, otherwise you have issues. And to not go down that rabbit trail, but you got to get the building science right. We were able to secure some funding through Natural Resources Canada through their Towards Net Zero Homes and Communities program to develop a continuing education certificate program. Next round of that actually begins in September here. And that's a series of 5 courses, 4 online, concluding with 1 week in-person lab. We're delivering it here at SAIT. We're also collaborating with other institutions, 6 other institutions that should be launching it this fall as well across the country. Not in a position to announce them quite yet. We've got to wait till they get all their landing pages and such up. But it's been fun to work on that project too, to get the funding to do it, and also do it in a way that it's not just SAIT developing a training program for SAIT that meets an industry need for upskilling and helping retrofit and reduce the emissions of all these existing homes across Alberta, but to develop it with a national focus and to have it be technically relevant across the country, so we can have a uniform program. My vision is that it will be, to make a bold statement, my vision is that it would be this standard for like the beginning training for retrofit contractors looking
Amazing.
to equip them with what they need to tackle their first retrofit projects.
Yeah. Well, you guys have touched on a number of things. I jotted down a couple of points, so I'd love to kind of peel into each one by one if we could. For some people, the term gray water, they might not be familiar with that. You mentioned that early on. Can you just quickly elaborate on gray water versus black water and how that might fit into a new build or a retrofit?
You bet. Yeah. So gray water is wastewater that we produce that is everything except toilet water. So, think of, and then, gray water itself can actually be split into light gray water versus dark gray water.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of came through all the
sinks,
research.
kitchen sink, bath sink, shower, shampoo, soap, little bit of like food gunk maybe.
There you go. That's the distinction between light and dark. So anything would be, your shower, which you easily, if you're trying to harvest your gray water, as an example, potentially use it for something. You would want to have, your light gray water versus your dark. Your light would be your showers and baths, where you can actually have, typically, biodegradable soaps or whatever, so a little bit easier on, the ecosystem. your bathroom sink, and maybe a laundry sink or something like that. But as soon as you get into kitchen sink and or the laundry machine, the laundry drain, those two areas can have a little bit more contamination. Whether you're opening meat package in the kitchen sink and you got blood, or laundering dirty diapers, or
Right.
vomit on clothing or something like that. So that in theory distinguishes that type of gray water as dark gray water.
Got it. So, because I know that's been really hard for some developers to implement within, like, they have great intentions, great ideas, certainly wanting to reuse water wherever we can, wanting to capture rainwater and use that to flush toilets and like kind of basic things. But I've heard these stories about, developers who weren't able to in the end. The city inspectors came in and said, no, like, some kid's going to drink out of the toilet, or, they like kind of these outlandish scenarios, but unfortunately they're not a probability of zero. And so you do end up having to do like UV and all kinds of kind of what at that time were cost prohibitive measures. And you were saying it in the context of net zero research. And when I look out right now at new construction and advertisements and stuff for like something in the suburbs, I don't hear anything about gray water as like a feature. So has it actually gotten to commercial implementation, or is it still really fringe?
It, at least in our country, and different provinces kind of had different levels of testing things out. I'll have make a statement here. Through the research that we did, and then over the years and learning more about it. So rainwater, so this is where I would jump over to rainwater being a lower hanging fruit. It's, potentially you have a more ability to harvest water that's, if you're doing pre-filtering before it actually gets stored, we can store some relatively clean water. The gray water research really, I bid into and talked to city managers in Guelph who did a huge, 40 home pilot study using a specific gray water recycling system. They had to chlorinate the crap out of it. So the toilet, people were complaining about their toilets smelling like super chlorinated. All of that, I met with U of C researchers that were focusing on wastewater. I delved down the whole rabbit trail of, full wastewater treatment within a single family residence, like say using solar aquatics, like they do in earthship homes and stuff like that, where you're actually using biological tanks of water and plants and aquatic species that go from one tank to tank to tank that actually help purify the water as it goes. But if I'm backing up to gray water, it's complicated. If you're storing it for 24 to 48 hours, it can go septic. So that creates an issue. All the infrastructure to now all the separate plumbing that you have to have that's different from your blackwater plumbing. So that adds costs and complications within, and you have to follow specific codes and purple piping and stuff like that. And then when you start taking gray water out of our wastewater stream, all our existing infrastructure that exists is based on, say, a 2% grade, where you're taking now that blackwater stream that is meant to carry all the solids and toilet papers and whatever else that goes down. If you're removing that gray water out of that wastewater stream, now you're creating a whole another sweep of issues in the wastewater drainage system.
Wow.
So it's
not flushing with as much volume, and you're causing clogs and
on these existing pieces of infrastructure that are laid out in, underground and the way they were. So there's a whole sweep of things that kind of come to the surface.
Yeah.
And in talking to one of the gentlemen at U of C, the researcher, he's like, just leave the gray water in the wastewater stream. All the efforts you're doing to try to conserve some water, leave gray water in the wastewater stream.
So
best to just, I'll just finish this. Yeah. Best to just use water conservation fixtures, low flow fixtures, low flow toilets, all that effort to try to harvest water, even rainwater on a single family residence. If you're in an urban setting, that's even way too costly. And the payback on trying to, if you're in a, neighborhood community, an urban community, better to just harvest some rainwater for the garden and, in a tank outside. But if you're trying to do a big harvesting and bringing that water inside to flush some toilets, that's a lot of expensive infrastructure and maintenance to just flush some toilets, where you could probably just put a low flow toilet in and you're much better along. So
Yeah,
Interesting.
Water's cheap.
Yeah.
And Dean and I, you and I have talked about this a bit over the years too. Like the biggest thing is if you've got the public water and the public sewage drainage system available, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, Dean, I would ask though, is it something to look into for those like rural acreages where you've got to do a fully independent water system and you could potentially reduce the size of your septic field and so forth?
So I'll back up and say, to scale, you asked Kevin about scale. Commercial scale is a different, if you're talking about a commercial scale building, then those types of gray water, rainwater are a different conversation. When you're at a multi-story, large building, one central system, then the conversation kind of changes. Yes.
Interesting.
And economies of scale, obviously, right?
Yeah, because I wouldn't want to throw it out just on because, hey, this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we should always do it. Those kinds of arguments are tougher. I think there's a lot of sort of eco-minded people that would probably be concerned about these as the takeaways, and wanting to continue to push the envelope. So I really like that you're saying like there's edge cases where it still does make sense, and that ultimately conservation is extremely helpful. When we use shampoos and things that aren't biodegradable, like maybe that's another element of the conversation, is let's like move more and more towards flushable stuff that isn't as harsh on the environment, because we all go to Shoppers Drug Mart and buy shampoos that aren't necessarily what they should be just because we like the smell. So yeah, carry on. Thank you.
No, to your question, Ben, when you're talking on a rural setting, that's that's a different context as well. There, if you are on a well that maybe is potentially affected or is drying up or it's got contamination, yes, rainwater harvesting, then you start kind of looking at those. I know lots of homes on rural settings that have a cistern that they have to get water trucked in. So, doing a rainwater harvesting makes sense there. Then I guess the thought I was going to go, there's a lot of other countries around the world that are a lot more water stressed than we are. So
that's where I was going with this. Yeah.
When you talk about water conservation and gray water reuse as one example, or reclaimed water is another category of water where it's actually been harvested, it's been treated, and now up only to a certain standard, not potable level, but only to a certain standard that then you can maybe reuse for irrigation. So there's other countries around the world where actually installing a reclaimed water line either to homes, potentially to, like in Australia, I believe I heard that they actually have within the city infrastructure, have your potable water to your house, you have your wastewater drainage away from your house, but they also have a extra purple line, non-potable reclaimed line that goes to your house or buildings, so they can use that water to flush toilets instead. So that's a nice, interesting leap. Or they have it to distributed to parks, and they actually have signage that say, irrigated with reclaimed water. So just
don't drink it.
Like that.
We are so blessed in this country to have one of the greatest freshwater resources on the planet. And that has led to very low cost or no cost water for homeowners and building owners. But I know that in other parts of the world, they look at us negatively, like we are the worst wasters of water on a per capita basis. We use a ton of it, and they kind of frown upon that. So we don't, we're known as nice people all around the world generally, but we also don't have the best reputation when it comes to our conservation habits. And I do wonder if our cost of water was higher, how much more motivated we would be to, really dig into these things, and if it would change the outcome or move the needle on the way we're seeing this right now.
I think the answer to that, just to wrap it up, is pretty simple. Yes. In Europe, they even charge people an extra fund or extra amount of money for how much water is leaving their building site, or their
Right.
actual house and lot. Like, so stuff like that. If price of water and stuff like that happen, types of charges like that were implemented here, there'd be a big different change, and we
Yeah.
would start looking at being more water conscious and conserving where we could. And then aside from water, people could look at us as being energy wasters as well, just to flip the subject.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for going so deep on this. I actually had want to be respectful of our time limit today and on all the other amazing things you guys are doing. So, you ended up basically developing this laboratory where you can run all kinds of wall assemblies and other devices through their paces so that you can give feedback to manufacturers, home builders, and so on. So let's touch on some of that and some of the gadgets that you have and the way that you test out performance of a product.
Yeah, awesome. And there's, I guess, to set the foundation for that conversation, one of our main missions as a research center is to help with market adoption, help bring new solutions to market for more sustainable, high performance green buildings, whether that be from an energy performance standpoint or a lower emissions standpoint or an occupant health. Like, there's all these different realms that you look at as that kind of house or building as a system. So we're invested in supporting bringing new products to market. We're not an accredited lab in that the testing we do, you can't necessarily go to the local code officials and they're like, okay, you've had this test done, you're good. But where we really thrive is helping particularly startups and other small and medium enterprises or manufacturers out there in bringing their new ideas to market, helping them to get somewhere from maybe a little bit beyond an early napkin sketch, but then to be market ready. And where we really thrive in helping is when they're in that iterative development point of view, where they're looking at developing prototypes and refining those prototypes. We look at doing the same testing methods that would be done for accredited lab testing, where there are third-party testing methods available to follow. And then we can do that testing a bit cheaper. We don't have as much overhead as we're not going through all the checks and balances we still try and do accurate testing and get replicable results, but we're not going through all of the checks and balances, and we don't have all the overhead that a full ISO accredited laboratory would have.
So it's a really good interim step for a startup to kind of come to you guys first. It's I'll say a little less formal, a little less a rigor, but not, I don't want to say rigor. That's not the right term. Just you guys can really work with them to help them refine, give them feedback on how things are looking and shaping up. And that's based on some of the sensors and devices and testing units that you have. So what are some examples of the kinds of products that you've been testing and the kinds of tests that you can run?
Yeah, so we've done, I guess, we'll start with the kind of tests we can run. So we can do a wide variety of the smaller scale where we're looking at little small material samples on the structural side, on the water impact, how much water are they absorbing, how does getting wet affect their structural strength or cause them to degrade. We can do thermal testing as well for smaller samples. We have a heat flow meter for doing that, which is to the same standard that all the insulation manufacturers use to get their numbers that they're reporting on their data sheets. So on the smaller scale, we can do a wide variety there. And then when we get to large scale, we have a large scale structural rack. And that allows us to take up to a 10 by 10 wall section. We primarily follow ASTM E72, which is for panelized structural testing. So we can do that top-down compression on the wall. We can lay that wall flat. And we do kind of multi-point loading. We spread the loading slightly across that wall to kind of replicate wind loading as well. We have another smaller rack on the side. I think we're limited to about 8 by 8 for wall samples in that. But that's where we can do racking loading, where we stand the wall up, fasten it across the base, and apply load at the top and see how well it racks over. If anybody watches stories when windstorms go through the southern states, or sometimes through Ontario, sadly, even, where you have these homes that are basically just stick framed up without sheathing to provide
Yeah.
that racking strength, and they crumble over. So that racking test verifies the strength of that. And those structural tests are really for where a manufacturer wants to propose a different system that varies from the basic standard code required framing metrics. So let's say we need engineers. So we work with company engineers as well for the manufacturers and do the testing. We develop the methods or refine the methods as needed. And so their engineers are confident in the numbers we're getting from our testing and can use it in their calculations for the projects they're doing. That structural rack 2, we can apply a load and measure deflection with multiple sensors. So we can do a wide variety of tests with that apparatus beyond just those wall panel tests. And then beyond the structural side, we have a new weathering chamber, which we just commissioned in the fall of 2025 at the end of the year there. We've done a couple initial tests. That allows us on the full scale size to take a roughly 9 foot by 9 foot square wall assembly.
Wow.
And we can replicate an interior environment on one side and an exterior environment on the other side, controlling temperature and humidity. We have a spray rack we can mount as well to replicate precipitation. We're working on commissioning the different aspects of it that we designed it for, but to verify how it's gonna work. So
ice and what kind of extreme temperature variance can you achieve?
So far, we're hitting about minus 29 Celsius, I believe, but our target is to get below minus 40. We have a round of improvements we're hoping to complete within the next year or so. But one of the most valuable things we see as well for the Alberta, and particularly the Calgary climate, is looking at that freeze-thaw cycling. So not necessarily going down really cold, but what happens to a wall assembly when there's moisture that's in it from precipitation, and it runs through those freeze-thaw cycles, and we'll embed temperature and moisture sensors, potentially other sensors within the actual sample itself. So when we expose it to the conditions, we can monitor how that heat flow is moving.
Yeah, well, if a wall behaves anywhere close to what the roads in Calgary do in the freeze-thaw cycles, we got a lot more research to do. I have very vivid memories of a couple of those winters really wreaking havoc on the roads, right by SAIT, actually, because that's where I used to live. That's phenomenal. And so you've done a lot of wall assemblies, you've done windows. What other you did? You've got the whole like boiler furnace phase change stuff as well.
Yeah, I was gonna mention another aspect in our infrastructure is mechanical testing bays, which are unique and helpful for industry, where we can actually input, whether it be a mechanical or HVAC type product. We can connect it to natural gas if it requires natural gas, and exhausted independently, connected to electricity, drain. So we can kind of, in the past, we've done some micro combined heat and power testing. That was a project. And then more recently, in the last few years, testing out smaller scale phase change battery. So
yeah, that part of your facility is really cool. Yep. If you've got an interesting heating and cooling device you want to run through its paces, they got side-by-side bays where you can do some really granular testing there. I was very impressed with that.
And I would say with those bays too, we can plug them directly into our building. Our building looks and largely functions like a large house. We do have activities within it, like a whole bunch of desk space in our research, which kind of varies from us, but we can plug those pieces of equipment to get them connected to our main building functions to see how it works, or we can isolate them and replicate exact use cases that we need to have. Like with the phase change batteries, we can look at how would they perform as a water heating component for a home, and we could program exactly in how fast and how much water to run through and see how well it heats it and how long it lasts and what the energy use is on that. And then also we can run that through and run the same profile on a heat pump water heater or on electric resistance water heater or a gas boiler. Like we could look at replicating and creating the exact conditions that we need. So the main part is to test and de-risk these components to, ideally in our lab is where the initial testing happens. After that, you would look at refinement and then run it into a pilot build or project as they move forward to full certification to get their system out widely in the market.
Yeah, and this ties back to one of Dean's earlier comments. I mentioned the gray water. The other notes that I had made were around the net zero demonstration homes that you were doing with these builders in the early days. And in relation to what you just said, Ben, it's like, what are some examples, or are there some examples of how they've taken some of these learnings from the testing and applied it to what they're doing today?
I think,
has it changed? Because when I think about net zero, here's an example. You mentioned solar PV and solar thermal. And again, in the same way that I don't really see a lot of gray water in new homes, I also don't really see a lot of solar thermal in new homes. So they obviously have done something to start to say, like, all these new homes are net zero ready or they're net zero certified. What are the things that they're doing to achieve that? Is it just all in the wall? Is it in the R values? Is it in the windows? Is it in the lights? Is it in the solar PV? And what do you think made them go to those decisions?
I think the main metric that a lot of builders look to, and homeowners as well, is how do we get the performance we want for the lowest price? And also it's the experience of living with those technologies in your home, like the Avalon Discovery 5 house that Dean talked about before. Like, there's some complex systems in there. You've got a rainwater system that's flushing your toilets. We have that in our own lab here. And that pump that's bringing up the pressure, we've had some issues with the contact switch and that failing. And if the aeration in the cistern fails as well, that rainwater can go bad. And we've had to pump our cistern here out once before when things went south. But on the solar thermal side, I think there's been two factors. One is the cost to install the system. And two is how cheap natural gas has been, which up until recent years, natural gas has been that main competitor to solar thermal. Whereas now the conversation has changed more to electrification. So the question is now, and I'm not sure if anyone's really looking into it on the recent side of things, but does a solar thermal system make sense financially compared to a heat pump water heater? One of the learnings from early projects, I'm not sure if it influenced changes in the industry or if it was just a small factor in it. But when we did that set of 5 net zero homes in Northeast Calgary, they all had air-to-air heat pumps for heating the space. They all had heat pump water heaters in the basement. One of the slight learnings or things we noted in the monitoring, which is one of the key things we do in our pilot builds, or those that we're involved with, is how do we measure and verify and monitor how things are actually performing compared to what they're modeling, to say, hey, here's how it is actually working, not just we said it would, so it's fine. We found in those homes that the heat pump water heaters, they're taking heat out of the air within the home to heat the water. And so that needs to be factored in. And now it is. All the energy advisors and heat load calculator guys that are doing the F280s, they're factoring in that heat load from the heat pump water heater to make sure the heating system for the home itself is accounting for that and can keep up.
So I was going to just maybe add a little bit there, a little context as well. We've done a past project with Brookfield Residential back in about 2015, 2016 era, where we actually installed multiple different solar thermal systems. We took one multifamily block, so a 6-unit build, all one building, so a common roof on top. We installed 2 different types of solar thermal systems. We install actually maybe 3. A PV system, and then at that time we were also testing. This was when hot water heat pumps were just kind of early into the market there. And these are on multifamily units that have really tiny mechanical closets, we'll call it, like they're tiny. So we did a direct comparison on all these different units, comparing solar thermal to solar PV. One of them had a solar PV, and then different heat pump systems. So that was an interesting project in the sense that, could do a direct comparison. Energy is energy, and this is where the industry is almost as you mentioned, Kevin, solar thermal back, like, it was quite extensive back, I would say 2010 era. Like, there was lots of work on solar thermal. PV was expensive. So the industry's evolved. PV, the prices of solar PV panels has come
Right.
like absolutely just skyrocketed down. Costs of solar thermal
hasn't changed
haven't
much,
really
maybe
changed.
gone up.
Maybe gone up. You got pumps that are involved. You got glycol
Right.
system that requires maintenance. So I think the evolution of electrification being within everyone's purview nowadays, especially when trying to get to net zero, solar PV kind of just
PV's
seems
become
to just
easier.
tip the scale.
That's really interesting comment. Yeah, because I had heard historically solar thermal was cheaper to do, and virtually no moving parts, like very simple thing. But you're right. That hasn't changed much, while the PV has gone down, down, down. It just becomes easier to do, and the electrons you can do whatever you want with.
That's right.
Whereas the heat, it's just, you're going to do heat. You're not really going to take it up to steam and turn a turbine or anything like that in the home context.
And a lot of places around the world might not need that heat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're talking about in the United States, if it's really warm, like, if you're only talking about using some hot water once in a while, then, solar. So I'm not, knocking solar thermal.
Yeah, there's still a very good use case. Like we're friendly with some solar thermal folks, and certainly there's applications for it, and definitely supplementing gas or supplementing electric, like if you have electric baseboard or other things, or if you have hydronic systems. If you have a hydronic system, solar thermal can be a really nice complement because you can dump that heat into something that you can use for heating the space, for heating the water. If you have a pool or something in a more commercial space, like easy win there.
Yeah, and I think going beyond the solar thermal to electric photovoltaic conversation, just looking at like the wide range of projects and different technologies we've been involved with in the coming up on 20 years of research that GBTAC has done. There's no one silver bullet. That's not, here's the solution.
Yeah.
But it's really is on a building by building basis, whether it's residential or commercial, single family or multifamily. It's what are the use cases, what are the constraints, and what are the technologies that best fit with that. We have those, like on the energy generation or energy reduction standpoint, how do we reduce our emissions? Like photovoltaics have really come to lead and become more affordable and relatively simple to install and maintenance free. So that's been a great system that is a checkbox for the majority of projects out there where they have a roof or space on their property to install it that is facing the sun. There are those limitations there as well still that we need to recognize. But
yeah, especially in the retrofit context.
Especially on retrofit. And it really comes down to the consultant's favorite term. It depends.
Which always sounds like a cop-out, but it's true. It really does. It really does. And so I'll give everybody who says that a free pass, because I've had to say it myself. The devil's in the details, and there's always different variables to take into consideration. What are the windows like? What's the envelope like? What's the roof like? What orientation does the roof have? How old is it? In terms of what you do, when you do it, how much life is left in the furnace, how close to high efficiency is it already? We have a situation in the north where, there's a funding program that's sort of leaning towards decarbonization, electrification, right? So at the surface level, it says, hey, no natural gas is going to be eligible. So say, okay, if we switch from the natural gas furnace that the building has now to an electric system, you have $1 a kilowatt hour. So your bills are going to go way up. And the grid itself, if you look at emissions intensity in the north, in ideal times, there's some hydropower that they're able to tap into. But in the last couple of years, that reservoir is at an all-time low. So they're firing up the diesel gens for the bulk of the grid. So you would actually be going backwards to electrify off of a grid that's largely diesel based versus going to a higher efficiency gas system. But of course, we've written some of these programs in, I won't say in a silo, but just in an idealistic view.
Yeah.
And the truth is, it depends on the context in which you're trying to apply this to, as to what the better thing actually is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you guys had mentioned about sort of giving a little bit of a tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I'll join on my phone, and Dean will be the tour guide.
Yeah,
all right.
It's
So
easier to explain kind of what we do with a bit more context of our actual site and our facilities.
Yeah.
Of our building and the PV, and then move
Amazing.
in.
Yeah.
We'll
So
run around the building.
What I think I'll do,
run
guys,
down?
is we're gonna make this kind of a part 2 of this recording. So I'm just gonna say, so we're gonna cut to a tour of the facility. Thank you so much, Dean and Ben, for going deep on a number of these topics today. There's so many more things we could cover. I think we're gonna have to have you guys back, but we're gonna pick up in a few minutes and do a quick tour of the building. So thanks so much, guys. Very insightful chat.
Appreciate it.